It begins with the shriek of twisting metal on a foggy highway, an early morning crash that would claim the life of 60-year-old Thomas Caldwell. Outwardly, his death was a tragic accident, but as shattered glass glittered under cold emergency lights, so too did the first hints of a lethal scheme. Soon a shocked community would face a disturbing question. Was this merely the result of poor luck and timing, or a complex murder plot hatched by the one person who vowed to love him most? Thomas Caldwell, a self-made success, believed wholeheartedly in the power of redemption. He never imagined that his faith in second chances would guide him blindly into a deadly trap. At the epicenter of this grim puzzle was a young ex-convict named Rachel Monroe, charming, persuasive, and haunted by a past of embezzlement she claimed to have outgrown. Their whirlwind romance led to a swift marriage, only for it all to end in a single devastating collision. When investigators discovered his life insurance had soared to $2.5 million shortly after the wedding and that only Rachel stood to benefit, the flicker of suspicion roared into a full blaze. Thank you, viewers, for joining us on this episode of True Crime at Last. We appreciate your time, your curiosity, and your trust as we venture into the dark corners of human nature. If the grim twists of this case fascinate you and make you question everything you thought you knew about trust, please consider subscribing to our channel. We promise to bring more tales that disturb, intrigue, and challenge our notions of the truth hidden beneath everyday facades. Rachel Monroe's story began in a modest apartment complex miles away from any bright city lights. From the start, she possessed a restless ambition that surfaced in small acts of deceit. A borrowed cardigan she never returned. A creative lie to slide out of a high school detention. Early counselors and teachers remarked that she seemed bright, but unmotivated by traditional pursuits. A teacher once described her as having unusual people skills, a term that might have been flattery had her ethical compass not pointed astray. By the age of 19, Rachel's domestic illusions of normalcy collapsed when she landed a job as an administrative assistant at a local financial firm. This position, which could have offered her a respectable career path, soon became her personal playground for exploitation. Initially, she pilfered petty cash, or forgave her own small expenses. But what began as small-time pilfering spiraled into the embezzlement of tens of thousands of dollars. When the firm traced the missing funds to her, she was tried, found guilty, and sentenced to 5 years behind bars. Prison, however, did not break Rachel's spirit, it refined her methods. She learned the art of knowing when to feign remorse, how to win sympathy, and how to talk her way out of tough situations. She emerged at 23 with a seemingly earnest tale of regret and a promise to right her wrongs. Declaring herself reformed, she approached her new life, post-incarceration, with the same sense of cunning she had exhibited from the beginning, determined not to be derailed by the stigma of an ex-convict. She would, she insisted, secure the comfortable life she felt. The world owed her one way or another. Thomas Caldwell was the defining example of the American dream. Born to a working-class family, he spent decades developing small businesses into profitable enterprises. Each success layered another stone in his well-earned reputation for fair dealings, good sense, and a drive to uplift those around him. Widely respected, Thomas made a habit of sharing his prosperity through charitable donations. By the time he turned 60, he had amassed a healthy fortune, sold his last business, and chosen to settle into a quiet retirement surrounded by the fruits of his labor. Never one to remain idle, Thomas found himself feeling the ache of loneliness in a sprawling home meant for a family. Divorced twice and childless, he felt a tug to find companionship, someone with whom he could share the slower pace of his retirement years. Friends and relatives knew him as generous and, at times, overly trusting. Deep down, he wanted to see the good in everyone. This trait would become the lens through which he judged Rachel Monroe. He met her through an online dating service, saw her rap sheet, and decided that he admired her story of supposed reformation. He wanted to champion her second chance, and she wasted no time reinforcing that narrative for him. Thomas and Rachel's courtship took place at a rapid-fire pace that felt almost cinematic. Their first in-person date at a historic Italian restaurant set a rosy tone for what seemed like a romantic rescue tale. An older man with a tender heart meeting a younger woman in need of a chance to re-establish herself. She listened with rapt attention to his stories about entrepreneurship, philanthropic passion, and how it felt to stand at the summit of a successful career. Rachel, for her part, wove an image of a woman reborn. She recounted her difficult teenage years, poor decisions, and how prison had given her time for introspection. She nodded fervently when Thomas mentioned the importance of giving back, slipping in that she would love to start a charity for women in need if only she had adequate resources. Every so often, she teased out questions about Thomas's work, carefully assessing how much money he had, how much remained under his name, and what sort of insurance or investment policies he held. After a month of digital correspondence and a series of carefully orchestrated chance encounters where Rachel would just happen to be near the locales, Thomas frequented, the relationship blossomed into exclusivity. She dazzled him with carefully timed gestures of affection and a near-perfect ability to mirror his own passions and concerns. Thomas introduced her to his friends and nephew Eric. Although Eric sniffed out something discomforting in her quick intimacy with Thomas, he couldn't place any tangible misstep on her part. Rachel seemed polite, engaged, and most crucially, absolutely devoted to Thomas. A few months into the relationship, Rachel moved into Thomas's Homea stately property quiescently nestled on the outskirts of town. Despite its elegance, Thomas's house was a lonely place. Large hallways, grand rooms, and echoes of a life spent chasing business deals rather than forging a family. Rachel quickly revitalized the space, hosting small gatherings, revamping decor, and making Thomas feel that his mansion no longer stood hollow. It took only 3 months for Thomas to propose. Everyone surrounding him reeled at the news. They hadn't expected him, a man so measured in business, to commit so hastily to a woman he had just met, especially one with a criminal record. But love, and perhaps a yearning to prove that redemption was real, overcame every warning. With an intimate ceremony in his expansive backyard, Thomas Caldwell married Rachel Monroe. The newlyweds radiated a peculiar sort of joy. For him, it was the glow of someone who believed he had found a partner to banish the loneliness of his big house and big dreams. For her, it was an excitement laced with subtle calculation. Already, discreet questions about inheritance and life insurance found their way into conversation. Rachel pleaded with Thomas, in the sweet tremor of an unassuming tone, to ensure his affairs were in order. For our future. After a time, she suggested, it might be best if she was the sole beneficiary in his upcoming will and the primary beneficiary of his insurance policy. The logic, as she skillfully framed it, was that they should be able to make swift decisions if something happened to him, and ensure no confusion would complicate the estate. Thomas's nephew, Eric, who had previously been set to inherit a good portion of Thomas's assets, flagged this as an immense red flag. Thomas's longtime friend Miriam found it jarring that a newly married couple would jump into such drastic adjustments immediately. But every confrontation with Thomas about Rachel's intentions fizzled when Thomas scolded them for their cynicism. He saw only the best in her. He wanted them to see her the same way. Perhaps it was this attitude that made it so easy for Rachel to orchestrate her next steps. With surprising swiftness, life insurance coverage that once stood at a modest sum ballooned into a $2.5 million policy, with Rachel stated as the sole beneficiary. Rachel's wide-eyed humility masked the surging excitement of accomplishing exactly what she had planned since the day she flicked through Thomas's dating profile, reading about his success. The Caldwell household noticed incremental changes in Rachel's behavior. Once cheerful and gracious, she occasionally snapped at staff, displaying an expectation of immediate obedience. She began micromanaging the household budget. She spearheaded home repairs without consulting Thomas, all the while reaffirming an image of an attentive wife on the outside. Friends would make passing remarks about her intensity or oddly specific knowledge of Thomas's finances. In front of Thomas, however, she maintained the veneer of a warm, caring companion. Here and there, as if dropping crumbs in a forest, Rachel left subtle signs of her jealousy and territorial nature. She bristled if Eric suggested he and Thomas spend an afternoon going over old paperwork. She bristled if attorneys from Thomas's past business dealings visited. Always, she had a ready excuse. "I just want to protect Thomas's time, so he doesn't have to deal with unnecessary burdens." Soon, she found an excuse to drive Thomas's car more often than he did, claiming to pick up groceries or worrying about the staff's errands. She tested small changes that Thomas wouldn't notice: a replaced screen in his seatbelt mechanism, different brand of fluids for the car's mechanical needs. A trusting man, Thomas shrugged these off. She was being helpful, he thought, a real partner in managing daily life. The day Thomas Caldwell's life was snuffed out began bleakly. A low-slung sky draped the road in fog. Thomas left his estate early for what he claimed was a quiet morning drive, a routine he had adopted to clear his mind. The official telling of events suggests his car began to veer off a remote turn, spinning out and toppling down an embankment into a thick barrier of trees. By the time rescue workers arrived, the vehicle was unrecognizable. The front twisted into the trunk, the wheels akimbo, the dashboard crushed. Thomas had been wearing his seatbelt, but the belt had inexplicably jammed, trapping him. He died at the scene. Though it could have been filed away as a tragic accident, the local authorities immediately noticed inconsistencies. Thomas's brake lines were nearly severed, scuffed in a manner that suggested tampering. A chipped piece of plastic wedged under the hood looked out of place: the seatbelt mechanism. An initial suspicion turned into a near certainty of sabotage. The question that followed was simple yet devastating. Who would want to murder Thomas Caldwell? As investigators scrambled for answers, Rachel put on a performance that some described as heartbreakingly raw and others found strangely suspect. She arrived at the hospital in tears, hair disheveled, embracing the paramedics and sobbing openly in front of cameras. The wails were so theatrical that hospital staff felt a twinge of dissonance. Some interpreted it as the shock of sudden loss, others called it a performance. Rachel demanded immediate updates. She clutched Thomas's clothes, repeatedly gasping that she didn't understand how any of this could happen. In the confusion, a few reporters snapped photos of her inconsolable face, but they also captured something else. The flicker of her gaze scanning the room to see who was watching. For those who noticed, it was hard to shake the impression that she was measuring the impact of each tear, each wrenching sob. Within a day of the crash, the police learned of the $2.5 million life insurance policy. The existence of that large sum prompted them to dig even deeper. An in-depth look at Thomas's final months revealed how Rachel had continuously pressed him to increase his coverage and to finalize her as sole beneficiary. As if that weren't enough, a routine check of phone and computer records indicated that Rachel had performed internet searches related to sabotaging cars, cutting brake lines, and ways to cause drowsiness without arousing suspicion. It was a damning trifecta: motive, opportunity, and means. A forensic examination detected a mild sedative in Thomas's system, consistent with the brand found in a locked drawer in Rachel's bedroom. Investigators theorized that Rachel likely drugged him to ensure he would be too lethargic to react should the brakes fail. His seatbelt had been tampered with, possibly jammed to trap him inside, sealing his fate in a single catastrophic spin. Rachel's purchases of certain tools, captured on a hardware store's CCTV footage, sealed the coffin on any chance she had at plausible deniability. By the second day after the accident, Detective Pamela Nash, a tenacious investigator known for her thoroughness, requested Rachel come to the station for questioning. Rachel tried to maintain her tears, but her composure began to crack when confronted with the revelations of her suspicious browser history, the seatbelt tampering, and the sedative in Thomas's bloodstream. She insisted she was innocent, that her computer must have been hacked, that someone else had purchased those tools, that the sedatives were for an unrelated medical condition. Yet with every frantic denial, more evidence stacked against her. By digging into Rachel's background, police discovered her history of embezzlement, confirming that financial gain had been a familiar motive for her. Newspaper headlines ran wild, painting Rachel as a gold-digging killer who exploited Thomas Caldwell's generosity. Sensational talk shows trotted out ex-cons who described the ways that manipulative inmates sometimes studied ways to commit crime more effectively. Community members tried, in vain, to rationalize how a brilliant and seasoned entrepreneur like Thomas Caldwell could be so thoroughly deceived. Thomas's nephew, Eric, served as a central informant, offering details about the life insurance changes, the awkward tensions, and the warnings he and others had tried to give Thomas. Detective Nash gathered statements from members of staff at Thomas's estate, who recounted how Rachel's presence led to hush-hush inquiries about financial documents. She left no stone unturned. The once friendly staff recalled a chilling shift in the atmosphere once Rachel assumed a central role in decision-making. In less than a week, Rachel was formally arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Onlookers gathered outside the courthouse, some shouting curses or brandishing protest signs about pouncing on older men's fortunes. Others stood silently, some with expressions of sorrow for Thomas, who had loved and believed in Rachel wholeheartedly. Prosecutors laid out a meticulously assembled case. Rachel married Thomas, coerced him into making her the sole beneficiary of his life insurance, and carefully plotted his murder. They highlighted the dispassionate details, the tampered brake lines, the sabotaged seatbelt, the drug that hindered Thomas's ability to respond in a moment of danger. The timing made everything more damning, as the policy increase had gone into effect only shortly before Thomas's deadly crash. Rachel's defense team argued that the evidence was circumstantial. Couldn't anyone have cut the brakes? Couldn't Thomas have used sedatives for sleepless nights and forgotten to tell Rachel? Why assume Rachel performed those suspicious searches herself, and not another occupant? Or even a hacker? They tried to depict her as the hapless victim of condemnation, singled out by bias against ex-convicts. But each argument was easily dismantled. Her direct financial windfall, her consistent pattern of manipulation, her unsubtle attempts to secure sole beneficiary status, these details painted an unflinching picture of premeditated homicide. Eric Caldwell and Miriam took the stand, providing heartfelt accounts of how they witnessed Rachel's quick infiltration into Thomas's life and the warning signs they'd tried to convey. The prosecution also called digital forensic experts who testified about the near impossibility that the suspicious web searches could have come from anyone else's device. Auto mechanics brought in explained how the brake lines appeared to have been cut in a deliberate, knowledgeable manner. One store employee recognized Rachel from surveillance footage, showing her purchasing torque wrenches and specialized shears. Like a house of cards flicked by a professional gambler, Rachel's stories crumbled. Her tears did not resonate as genuine. The jury, faced with the mosaic of evidence, took little time to return with a verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder and fraud. It was not only a triumph for the prosecution, but a solemn moment for the Caldwell family and community. The judge, citing the reprehensible nature of a homicide committed for financial gain, handed down a life sentence without the possibility of parole. In the wake of the trial, Thomas's circle struggled to reconcile two opposing truths. He had lived an impressive, generous life, yet his final chapter was overshadowed by betrayal. Friends exchanged sorrowful sighs about how, despite his sound business instincts, Thomas let his personal longing for love blind him to glaring red flags. Some of them endured haunting dreams about that final crash, imagining the moment of terrified clarity that Thomas might have experienced, realizing that the person he loved had orchestrated his demise. Eric, who once expected to inherit much of his uncle's estate, found himself distanced from the entire idea of money. He wanted no share of the conversation surrounding finances or inheritance. All he really craved was his uncle back. He participated in a local memorial where former employees, family, and old friends gathered to honor Thomas not as the victim of a ruthless killer, but as a man who built businesses from scratch, mentored countless aspiring entrepreneurs, and opened his home and heart too generously. Mourners placed flowers near a portrait of Thomas, smiling in simpler times, no overshadowing disclaimers, no mention of the tragedy that took him too soon. The estate was sold, a portion of the proceeds going to philanthropic causes Thomas had supported during his lifetime. It seemed fitting. Those who loved him said that even in death he was giving back. For them, remembering the luminous parts of Thomas's story became the best salve to the wound inflicted by Rachel's deceit. At its core, the story of Rachel Monroe and Thomas Caldwell wields a potent cautionary tale about trust, greed, and the illusions we embrace. The tragedy reveals how a second chance, while noble and often deserved, should not eclipse guarded judgment. Too often, a charismatic manipulator relies on society's goodwill, spinning a narrative of redemption that tugs at our heartstrings while carefully masking cold-blooded intentions beneath. As for Rachel, one might ask whether she was ever sincerely willing to change her ways, or if her time behind bars merely sharpened her strategic approach to exploitation. In her quest for wealth, she devalued the life of the person who believed in her the most. The moral line between redemption and reoffending for Rachel was blurred by her overarching greed, and the consequences proved lethal. Thomas Caldwell epitomized the good-hearted optimist, trusting in the power of love and forgiveness. He presented a path out of darkness for Rachel, but in the end, that path led him directly to his own demise. His story prompts us to ask ourselves, how can we uphold compassion for those who have erred while safeguarding our well-being and those we love? Is there a safeguard that can shield us from a cunning deceiver's illusions, or does empathy, by its very nature, open us to the risk of betrayal? What resonates most is the haunting notion that humans are capable of weaving grand illusions, deceiving not only others, but also themselves. The warning signs were there for Thomas, etched in the subtle behaviors of his bride, but overshadowed by the glow of second chances. If there is a lesson to be carried beyond the tragic crash on that foggy morning, it is to trust with caution, to believe in redemption but verify the truth behind the tears, and to remember that sometimes the face of innocence conceals unstoppable greed. We hope this chilling narrative from True Crime at Last compels you to reflect on the dark complexities that lurk in seemingly simple stories of love and second chances. Thank you again for accompanying us through this heartbreaking case. If you found this story thought-provoking, haunting, or instructive, do subscribe to our channel and share your own insights. Until next time, stay vigilant, keep your eyes open for hidden red flags, and remember, trust is a precious gift. Handle it with care when you sense shadows in the wings.